evening, Bumblebee folks. I'm Alexa, the resident emo girly, and it's so fun to be back for another installment of talking about iconic women in history. I'm gonna preface today with a little disclaimer. When I'm referring to unspeakable acts, I mean unspeakable for the time, so take off the modern lenses from your point of view before I see y'all saying, things aren't impressive. Also, I'm using the term warrior loosely today. Think of it more like a warrior for women's rights instead of just, the actual battle term. Question for y'all. Who do you think is the most impressive gal in history? Let me know in the comments, and welcome to the top 10 feared female warriors who did unspeakable acts. Well, I pray my voice holds on. Number 10, Joan of Arc. Had to start with the obvious. Around the age of, 12 or 13, Joan of Arc apparently began hearing voices and experiencing visions, which she interpreted as signs from God. During her trial, she testified that angels and saints first told her to merely attend church and live piously. Later, they began instructing her to deliver France from the invading English and establish Charles, the uncrowned heir to the French throne, as the country's rightful king. Now, she asserted that a bright light often accompanied the visions and that she heard the voices more distinctly when bells sounded. Once placed in control of the French army, the young peasant didn't hesitate to chew out prestigious knights for swearing, behaving indecently, skipping mass, or dismissing her battle plans. She even accused her noble patrons of spinelessness in their dealings with the English. Atta girl. According to witnesses at her retrial, Joan once tried to slap a Scottish soldier who had eaten stolen meat. She also supposedly drove away the ladies of the night who traveled with her army at sword point, hitting one or two in the process. According to the Joan of Arc archive, while being held by the English, she fastened her hose up to her tunic with 20 cords, and her boots went all the way up to her waist and were also attached to her tunic. Icon. Number 9, Boudicca. Boudicca, the queen of the Iceni of East Anglia, Britain, did not set out to be a warrior, but after her husband, the Iceni ruler, died in 60 BC, the Romans, Indiana Jonesed her and sexually harmed her daughters, and she had no choice but to make a stand. Now, she raised an army and destroyed Camalodunum, Colchester, what is now known as London, and what is now known as St. Albans. Roman historian Cassius Dio describes her this way. In stature, she was very tall, in appearance most terrifying, in the glance of her eye most fierce, and her voice was harsh. A great mass of the tawniest hair fell to her hips. The British faced a retribution in 60 or 61 BC. However, when the Roman general Suetonius met them in battle, Boudicca led from her chariot, exhorting her soldiers to fight or become enslaved, but she and her army were sadly defeated. Tacitus reports that she then took poison, although that was never proven, but I'm all for going out on your own terms. Number 8, Artemisia I of Caria. Named after Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, Artemisia was the 5th century BCE queen of Halicarnassus, a kingdom that exists in modern-day Turkey. However, she was best known as a naval commander and ally of Xerxes, the king of Persia, in his invasion of the Greek city-states. She made her mark on history in the Battle of Salamis, where the fleet she commanded was deemed the best against the Greeks. Greek historian Herodotus wrote of her heroics on this battlefield of the sea, painting her as a warrior who was decisive and incredibly intelligent in her strategies. This included a ruthless sense of self-preservation. With a Greek vessel bearing down on her ship, Artemisia intentionally steered into another Persian vessel to trick the Greeks into believing she was one of them. And hey, it worked! They let her be, and the Persians sank glug glug glug. Watching from the shore, Xerxes saw the collision and believed Artemisia had sunk a Greek enemy, not one of his own. For all this, her death was not one recorded in a great battle, but in a sexist legend. It is said that Artemisia fell hard for a man, who ignored her to his detriment. Blinded by love, she blinded him in his sleep. Yet even with him disfigured, her passion for him burned. To cure herself, she set to leap from a tall rock in Leucas, Greece, which was believed to break the bonds of love. Instead, it broke her neck, and that was the end of her. Number 7, Tomoe Gozen. So most of Japan's stoic, highly disciplined samurai warriors were men, but one of the most famous was a woman. The story of Tomoe Gozen, or Lady Tomoe, is known primarily from the Tale of the Heike, a fictionalized story of the 12th century Genpei War between two families, the Taira, also known as the Heike, and the Minamoto. She was a samurai of her warlord husband, or possibly lover, Kiso no Yoshinaka, also known as Minamoto no Yoshinaka. Tomoe was described as a fearless rider whom neither the fiercest horse or the roughest ground could dismay, and so dexterously did she handle sword and vowed that she was a match for 1,000 warriors and fit to meet either god or devil. With her help, Yoshinaka triumphed against the Taira, but then his family turned on him. He found himself battling his cousin at the Battle of Awazu in 1184, and Tomoe was with him on the battlefield until only 5 warriors remained. Yoshinaka ordered her to leave him as he lay dying, but she seized an enemy soldier in a powerful grip, pulled him down against her saddle, held him motionless, twisted off his head, and threw it away. Then she dropped her armor and rode off. Out of history. Icon. Number 6. Tang Sai-Er. So during China's 15th century Ming dynasty, Tang Sai-Er, a young girl from Putai, which is present-day Shandong province, was taught martial arts by her father. She married an itinerant named Lin San and joined the White Lotus Society, a secret religious and political order, and became a local leader. Her world changed when she lost her parents and then her husband at a time when the emperor imposed hefty taxes and flood and drought ravaged the land. Not one to inaction, she raised a peasant army in 1420, successfully fighting Ming soldiers. In some accounts, she won one battle by creating a flying demon out of an army of paper dolls. When at last she was defeated, she fled and was never found. Some tales say that she was captured but could not be harmed or killed by any weapon. It was also said that she had disguised herself as a Buddhist nun. All nuns in the area were arrested and questioned, but she was never found. Number 5. Nzinga Mbande. Celebrated for her intellect, political cunning, and ability to speak Portuguese, Nzinga Mbande defined much of the history of 17th century Angola. When Portuguese slave traders threatened her homeland, she was asked by her brother, the king, to negotiate a peace treaty in 1622. And at the meeting, the Portuguese provided her with a mat on which to sit, implying her inferior status to the governor. She motioned for one of her assistants to kneel on her hands and knees to serve as a chair, establishing her equality in negotiating the treaty. Upon the death of her brother in 1624, Nzinga became queen of Ndongo, against tradition declaring only males could rule, the vast kingdom of the Mbondu people, and went on to conquer the nearby kingdom of Matamba. Quickly proving herself a monarch and to not be messed with, she formed alliances with former rival states to fight the Portuguese in what would become a 30-year war. But she wasn't just a royal leader. She prepared young soldiers by leading them in arrows and spears, war dance exercises. She also personally led troops into battle into her 70s, while still holding the title of general. Number 4. Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian was born to a relatively wealthy family and had extremely progressive parents, becoming well-versed in a wide range of subjects, including writing, music, literature, and perhaps most importantly, politics and governmental affairs. But at the age of she was summoned to the imperial palace to become a concubine of Emperor Taizong. After his passing, the newly anointed Emperor Li Zi, the youngest son of the late emperor, who became Emperor Gaozong, brought Wu to the imperial court to be his own concubine. In 654, Wu bore a daughter, but shortly after birth, sadly it passed, with evidence showing signs of rope necklace stuff. Wu accused Empress Wang of the death, and Wang lost favor with the emperor. The most popular theory, though, is that Wu actually ended her own daughter's life, sadly. Thereafter, the emperor conferred with his chancellors, and despite oppositions, demoted Wang, having her imprisoned and promoted Wu to empress. Later on, the emperor considered having Wang released, but Wu had her executed upon hearing this. Now, upon her accession to the throne, Wu began targeting officials who had opposed her rise to power, having them arrested and imprisoned, exiled, forced to take their own lives, or executed. In 664, she accused several officials of witchcraft and had them also executed, and their families became slaves within the imperial palace. In another incident, she killed her niece with poison. She eventually passed after repeated bouts with illness. Sadly, nothing nefarious there. Number 3. Trieu Thi Trinh. Commonly referred to as Lady Trieu, this warrior of 3rd century Vietnam temporarily freed her homeland from Chinese rule. That is according to traditional Vietnamese sources at least, which also state that she was 9 feet tall with 3 foot that she tied behind her back during battle, and usually fought while riding an elephant. And hey, that makes sense to me. Chinese historical sources make no mention of her, yet for the Vietnamese, this lady is one of the most important historical figures of her time, at least according to my research. Number 2. Maria Oktyabrskaya. Although it was not uncommon to see warrior women on the front lines defending the Soviet Union, there are special cases where individual females rose to great prominence through their exploits. As is common with Soviet heroes, Maria had humble beginnings. In 1925, she met and married a cavalry school cadet named Ilya Ryadnenko. After Ilya graduated, Maria led the life of a typical officer's wife, never being able to settle in one place and constantly being moved about Ukraine. After the outbreak of the German invasion, she was evacuated to Tomsk, while her husband stayed to fight the Yazidis. Sadly, he was killed in action on August 9th of 1941, and Maria filed a request to be sent to the front. She was initially denied because of her illnesses, as she suffered from spinal TB as well as her age. 36 was just considered too old. Undeterred, she sold everything she had and saved up enough money to buy a T-34 tank. She sent a telegram to the Kremlin, personally addressed to Stalin, explaining that she had bought a tank to assist in the war effort, and stipulated that she would donate it on the condition that she was the one to drive it. So in August of 1943, Maria graduated from the Omsk Tank School as a driver and with the rank of sergeant. With fighting girlfriend emblazoned on both sides of the tank, Maria and her crew took part in the battle for the village of Novoye Selo in Belarus. They performed admirably, killing 50 German soldiers and officers, as well as destroying a German cannon. Sadly, fighting girlfriend was hit and became stuck in a small ravine, but the crew continued to fight on for 2 days until the tank was retrieved. In January of 1944, near Vitebsk in Belarus, Maria and her crew saw heavy fighting. The tank's tracks were damaged, and as Maria tried to fix it, a mine exploded nearby, seriously injuring her. She was taken to a hospital in Smolensk, where she remained until she succumbed to her wounds on March 15th. She was buried on the banks of the Dnieper River and was posthumously awarded Hero of the Soviet Union. Number 1. Olympias. The mother of Alexander the Great, Olympias was one of the most remarkable women in antiquity. She was a princess of the most powerful tribe in Epirus, and her family claimed descent from Achilles. Despite this impressive claim, many Greeks considered her home kingdom to be semi-barbarous, a realm tainted with vice because of its proximity to raiding Illyrians in the north. Thus, the surviving texts often perceive her as a somewhat exotic character, if you will. In 358 BC, Olympia's uncle, the Molossian king Aribas, married Olympias to King Philip II of Macedonia to secure the strongest possible alliance, and she gave birth to Alexander the Great 2 years later in 356 BC. Further conflict was added to an already tempestuous relationship when Philip married again, this time to a Macedonian noblewoman called Cleopatra Eurydice. Olympias began to fear this new marriage might threaten the possibility of Alexander inheriting Philip's throne. Her Molossian heritage was starting to make some Macedonian nobles question Alexander's legitimacy. Thus, there was a strong possibility that Olympias was involved in the subsequent deaths of Philip II, Cleopatra Eurydice, and her young offspring. She's often portrayed as a woman who stopped at nothing to ensure Alexander ascended the throne, and following Alexander the Great's death in 323, she became a major player in the early wars of successors in Macedonia. In 317, she led an army into Macedonia and was confronted by an army led by another queen, none other than Sine's daughter, Aedia Eurydice. This clash was the first time in Greek history that two armies faced each other commanded by women. However, the battle ended before a sword blow was exchanged, because as soon as they saw the mother of the beloved Alexander the Great facing them, Eurydice's army deserted to Olympias. Upon capturing Eurydice and Philip, Eurydice's husband, Olympias, had them imprisoned in squalid conditions. Soon after, she had Philip impaled to death while his wife watched on. On Christmas Day of 317, Olympias sent Eurydice a sword, a noose, and some hemlock in order for her to choose which way she wanted to die. After cursing Olympia's name that she might suffer a similarly sad end, Eurydice chose the noose. Olympias herself did not live long to cherish this victory. The following year, her control of Macedonia was overthrown by Cassander, another of the successors. Upon capturing Olympias, Cassander sent 200 soldiers to her house to slay her. However, after being overawed by the sight of Alexander the Great's mother, the hired killers did not go through with the task. Yet this only temporarily prolonged Olympia's life, as relatives of her past victims soon killed her in revenge. And that brings us to the end of our time, and I think the most unspeakable thing I've ever done, hammering a nail at my nose, is suddenly paling in comparison to these gals. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you weren't already, hit the bell for more, and I'll see y'all next time I buzz in over here at Bumblebee.